Okay, let's dive in. We've been looking through some really fascinating material all about, well, aging.
Yeah.
Something that affects all of us, obviously. But looking at it maybe differently. Like maybe it's not this fixed thing we always thought.
Exactly. And, based on the research we've seen, our focus today is really narrowing in on these tiny structures deep inside our cells. They're called telomeres,
Telomeres.
little caps basically on the ends of your DNA strands.
Yeah, the material had that great analogy, didn't it? Like the plastic tips on shoelaces.
Keeps them from fraying. Yeah.
Keeps the important parts safe. And what really jumped out from this research, I think, is this tension. You've got some genuinely exciting science happening.
Definitely. Pointing towards ways we might actually influence aging.
But then, boom, it hits these like
Yeah.
major roadblocks. Especially, it seems, funding.
Yeah, that's a big one. So, look, our mission today is to unpack this. We want to get a handle on what these telomeres actually are, why this research says they're so vital for aging, what scientists are trying to do about them, and yeah, crucially, why things seem kind of stuck, despite the science looking so promising.
Perfect. So let's start right there with the basics from the material.
hmm
What are telomeres? Why are they such a big deal when we talk about getting older?
Okay, so at the simplest level, like you said, protective caps. Now, every single time one of your cells divides, and this is happening constantly, replacing old cells.
Right, all the time.
Those telomeres, they get a tiny bit shorter. It's just sort of a natural side effect of copying DNA.
Okay, so what's the consequence? What happens when they get too short?
That's where the issues really start, according to this research. When telomeres hit a critically short length, the cell basically, well, it ages out.
Ages out, meaning
It might stop working properly,
Right,
or
so-
it could enter this weird state called senescence, kind of like cellular retirement, but they can actually cause inflammation and problems for neighboring cells.
Oh, right. Not good.
Not good. Or the cell might just trigger its own self-destruct sequence. So this shortening process, it's presented as a really key driver of aging at the cellular level.
The material gave some specific numbers, right?
Right.
To give us a sense of scale.
It did, yeah. They measure them in these units of length. So at birth, they're pretty long, maybe around 15,000 units.
Okay.
By the time you're an adult, just through normal living and cell division, they've worn down to about 10,000 units.
Right.
And the sort of danger zone the material points to, where cells really start to falter, is down around 5,000 units. It's this gradual wearing down that's happening in, well, all of us.
Okay, so if short telomeres equals aging cells,
Yeah.
the obvious question is, can we stop it? Or even reverse it? Can we protect them or, I don't know, regrow them?
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting. Our bodies actually have an enzyme that's designed to do just that rebuild and lengthen telomeres. It's called telomerase.
We have it already, so
Yeah.
why isn't it just working all the time, everywhere, keeping us young?
Well, and this is a really crucial point in the material. There seems to be a very good reason it's usually switched off in most of our cells.
Oh.
Yeah, the body tends to keep telomerase active mainly in specific places, like in our stem cells or reproductive cells, places where you need lots and lots of division.
Okay, it makes sense for those.
But in most other cells, it's generally suppressed, kept quiet.
And the research suggests that's deliberate, linked to cancer risk.
Precisely. This looks like one of biology's big trade-offs. On the one hand, yeah, reactivating telomerase could potentially fight aging by keeping telomeres long.
Which sounds great.
But the flip side is that cancer cells are notorious for hijacking telomerase. It helps them become immortal, lets them divide endlessly. So keeping it switched off in most places seems to be a key defense mechanism against tumors.
But there's still evidence suggesting that activating it, maybe carefully, could be beneficial against aging itself.
Yes, definitely. The material points to some compelling stuff, like experiments in mice where turning telomerase back on seemed to slow down aging signs, improve their health.
In mice, okay.
And also observations in humans. People who live to be, say, over 100 often seem to have naturally longer telomeres than average for their age.
Wow, okay. That potential sounds huge. But it keeps coming back to that cancer risk, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The material really hammers this point home. Any strategy to reactivate telomerase has got to be incredibly careful, super precise. You have to avoid accidentally giving cancer cells a boost. It's a real tightrope walk.
Okay, so scientists know the risks. They're walking this tightrope. What are the actual approaches being tried right now, based on what we read?
The research seems to highlight two main strategies. First one is looking for drugs, chemical compounds that can switch telomerase on, but in a controlled way.
Right. And wasn't there a company mentioned that's really going hard on this?
Yeah. Yeah, Sierra Sciences, they're mentioned as taking this really systematic approach. Apparently, they've tested over 350,000 different compounds.
350,000. That is a massive search.
Huge screening effort, just trying everything to see what might flip that switch.
And did they find anything? Any glimmers of hope and all that?
They did find some things. Around 900 compounds showed some ability to activate telomerase, at least in lab tests.
Okay, 900 leads. That sounds promising. So are we talking like a pill to keep telomeres long coming soon?
Well, this is where the material brings us back down to earth a bit, on the drug front anyway. The limitation right now is pretty significant. Even the best compound they found so far.
Yeah.
It only activates telomerase at about 16% of the level they think is needed to actually make a real difference in lengthening telomeres significantly.
16%. Okay, so not quite there yet. Still a long way to go from a lab hit to an actual working drug.
A very long way, it seems.
Got it. So drugs are one path, a tough path. What was the second big approach mentioned in the material?
The second major strategy is gene therapy.
Okay.
So instead of a drug, this involves delivering the genetic instructions directly into cells, telling them to start making telomerase themselves.
And there's work being done there too, someone testing this.
Yeah, a company called BioViva is mentioned. They've apparently done some early stage tests using gene therapy specifically aimed at lengthening telomeres.
And the results, what did the material say about those?
Positive early signs based on what we saw.
Right. So promising signals from gene therapy, promising leads at least from the drug searches. It makes you wonder, why isn't this whole field moving faster, given, what's potentially at stake with aging?
And this, I think, is maybe the most critical part of what the material lays out. It really digs into the major roadblocks. And the first one is kind of a big structural barrier. It's how health regulators even classify aging.
How do you mean?
Well, officially, aging isn't considered a disease. That might sound like just words, semantics, but it has huge practical consequences. Think about it. The whole system for developing and approving new treatments, like drugs or therapies, it's built around treating specific diseases. If aging itself isn't classified as a disease, it becomes incredibly difficult to get a treatment approved that targets the process of aging, rather than just, say, heart disease or Alzheimer's, which are linked to age.
I see. So the usual path for getting a drug approved is blocked, essentially. That must slow things right down. What else is holding it back?
Money and time. The timelines just don't line up well with how typical investment works.
How so?
Developing these kinds of really novel treatments from the first discovery in a lab all the way to something you can actually use can easily take 20 years, maybe even 30.
Wow, decades.
Yeah. And a lot of investors, particularly venture capital folks, they're often looking for a return much faster than that. They might not be willing or able to tie up money for that long.
That makes sense from their perspective, I guess. But yeah, it creates this big funding gap for the really long-term fundamental stuff like aging research. What about public perception? Does that play a role?
Oh, definitely. That's another big hurdle the material points out. The whole term anti-aging, unfortunately, it's got a lot of baggage.
Yeah, you hear that and you think.
Exactly. Dodgy pills, miracle creams, snake oil, as the material puts it. There's so much hype and, frankly, scams out there.
Right.
That it makes it really hard for the serious, rigorous science to get the attention, the public support, and ultimately the funding it needs. People hear anti-aging and they just tune out, thinking it's all nonsense, not, Nobel Prize level biology.
And government support. Is there much help coming from, like, national health agencies?
That's maybe the most startling figure in the material. Apparently, less than 1% of government health budgets go towards basic research on the biology of aging itself.
Less than 1%. For something that literally affects every single person on the planet, it seems tiny.
It's incredibly low. And the material clearly identifies this as a major reason why the foundational science isn't moving faster. So you've got this kind of perfect storm, right? Regulatory hurdles, investment timelines that don't fit, public skepticism, and next to no government funding. It's a massive wall.
It really sounds like the science is promising, but it's just hitting this wall built out of, policy, money, and PR problems. So given all that, what does the material suggest could actually be done? How can we speed things up?
It does lay out a few potential strategies. First, perhaps obviously, is the need for more private investment, but the right kind of private investment.
Meaning?
Long term. patient capital. The material mentions some big tech names, Jeff Bezos, Peter Thiel, Google's Larry Page, people who are already putting serious money into longevity research. It highlights we need more of that, investors willing to wait decades for a potential payoff.
Finding the money that matches the science's timeline. Makes sense.
Exactly. Second big thing, policy and regulation changes. Specifically, it argues that aging itself needs to be formally recognized, maybe reclassified, as a treatable health condition.
Back to that disease classification point.
Right. The thinking is, if you do that, you potentially unlock those standard pathways for developing and approving drugs and therapies that target aging directly.
That would be a fundamental shift, wouldn't it? How we even think about aging medically.
Huge shift. Third area is public awareness and education. The material gives examples like the SENS Research Foundation or Lifespan.io, groups that are actively trying to explain the real science to the public.
Yeah.
The idea is you need an informed public to push back against the misinformation, to build support for the policy changes, and to, create demand for more funding.
Fighting that snake oil image with actual facts.
Precisely. And the last point, the material stresses collaboration, more teamwork.
Between who?
Between academic researchers, private companies, maybe even government initiatives. Sharing data, sharing resources, pooling knowledge. It could help lower the risks involved in this kind of cutting-edge research and hopefully accelerate things.
Yeah, sharing the load, sharing the risk. That seems logical. Before we wrap up, there was one fact in there that really jumped out at me, just highlighting how serious this science actually is.
You mean the Nobel Prize?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget, right? But the 2009 Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded specifically for figuring out how chromosomes are protected by telomeres and discovering that enzyme, telomerase.
Yeah, it really grounds it. This isn't some wacky fringe idea.
No.
The basic biology here is rock solid, Nobel-recognized science.
Absolutely. It just underscores that the foundation is incredibly strong.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, let's try and pull this all together then. Based on this deep dive, telomeres seem like a genuinely exciting pathway for potentially extending not just how long we live, but how healthy we are as we live longer.
Yeah, the science is offering some powerful insights, potential tools even.
But right now, that potential, that scientific progress, it feels significantly blocked, held back by this mix of financial issues, regulatory red tape, and how the public perceives it all.
And the material really leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty provocative question, doesn't it? It suggests maybe the core question isn't really, can we slow aging anymore?
Because the science is suggesting, well, maybe we can.
The possibilities are becoming clearer, yeah. Instead, the question the material poses more like, will we as a society actually get our act together in time to benefit from this knowledge?
Put the ball back in our court, so to speak. Policymakers, the public.
Exactly. And the material does end with a few concrete suggestions for how you, listening, could potentially get involved if you wanted to help push things forward.
Right. It mentions things like donating to some of those organizations doing the research and advocacy work like SENS or Lifespan.io.
And also just speaking up, advocating for policies that start treating aging as a health challenge. We can actually tackle like that reclassification idea.
Yeah. And finally, just, sharing good information, helping people understand the actual science behind aging to sort of counter all that noise and misinformation out there.
It seems the path forward needs more than just brilliant scientists. It needs, broader understanding and engagement from everyone.